Hello again from LA, and welcome to the Crossing Borders podcast, where I interview founders doing business across borders and the people who support them, with a focus on founders in Latin America. My guest today is Greg Mitchell, who is a principal at Angel Ventures in Peru, where he looks to invest in Peru-based startups. After a career in finance in the US, Greg moved to Peru to work in finance, landing at Angel Ventures Peru, where he's a key member of the Peruvian tech ecosystem. We talk about the Peruvian tech ecosystem, how it's changed over the past few years, opportunities for local investment, how investors can take part in opportunities there, and where the ecosystem is going next. We also cover Angel Ventures teams across Latin America and their investment thesis for helping Latin American startups. Greg's perspective into the Peruvian ecosystem was really interesting for me to hear, and I hope you enjoy it too. Hello, Greg, and welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you for being willing to do it. So, where are you in the world today?
I live in Lima, Peru. I've been here for 6 years. I'm enjoying my time in Peru. I'm originally from Connecticut in the U.S.
And is Lima your first time in Latin America, or had you been in Latin America before?
No, I served in the Peace Corps in the Dominican Republic, so I was there for 2 years. And then between that permanent job and traveling, I had seen a lot of Latin America before moving to Peru.
That's interesting. There's another two founders that I will talk to in a later episode of the podcast that were in Peace Corps in Panama and ended up in Latin America starting a company as well.
Oh, great. Definitely a great experience to get out of your comfort zone and see a new region. And that, I think that was probably the initial impetus for me wanting to come back to Latin America and build a career here.
Where in the DR were you, and what were you doing for your time there?
I was in the Southwest, about an hour from the Haitian border. And my primary project was microfinance and community banks. I lived in a small town, so it was also English classes and birth certificate drives, anything that was important for community, especially youth in the town.
Very cool. And what did you do right after that?
After Peace Corps, I moved to New York and worked in finance for a private equity firm called Palladium Equity.
Interesting. And so now that you're in Peru, what do you do today? What's your day-to-day?
So right now I lead the Lima office of Angel Ventures. It's an early stage investment firm in the region. So part of my job is supporting the pipeline and sourcing and business development for the Angel Ventures regional fund. Probably most of my time is more on the ground in Peru, cultivating a network of angel investors. An important part of our model at Angel Ventures is working with local angel investors and filling a role in the ecosystem development by connecting those investors that can add value to the best entrepreneurs that we're seeing locally here in Peru and regionally as well.
Can you tell me a little bit more about Angel Ventures more regionally, and then we'll get more into specifics about Peru?
Yeah, Angel Ventures was started in 2008 by two MIT Sloan grads, Camilo Kirchner and Hernan Fernandez. And they started building a network of angel investors in Mexico. And that execution and track record led to raising a $20 million venture capital fund that has been invested primarily in Mexico-based startups or startups that have more regional presence, but maybe the initial market is the Mexican market. And in the different offices that we operate, we also, as I mentioned, we have in Peru, work with local angel investors that normally would come in either as co-investors to the fund I mentioned or in rounds earlier than where a typical VC pre-Series A fund would enter. So we try to there are multiple gaps, as you probably know, and many entrepreneurs know in Latin America in funding. So we try to fill in maybe post-acceleration, angel, seed rounds, and then with the fund, pre-series, Series A gap as well. So we see that as complementary in what we do in providing hopefully value-added capital to entrepreneurs or at least investors. If it's not us, other investors or angel investors that can help them with relationships or contacts or follow-on investment rounds.
So you said the fund generally will invest Series A. So for people in the US, they're thinking Series A might be, a $5 million check. What is a Series A size check for Angel Ventures in Mexico or the rest of Latin America?
I would probably characterize it more pre-Series A, but the checks still in the fund one are $250,000 to $500,000, which isn't the whole round. But I guess what we would be talking about would be $1 to $3 million rounds.
Yeah, that's what I call like the Latin American Series A. Everything
Right.
is like maybe between half and 80% lower in terms of capital amounts per round, as at least from what I've seen.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's funny you say that because generally in metrics for at least the Peru market, the Peruvian sol is about 3.2 to the dollar. So many of even the operating metrics, U.S. operating metrics, when I hear those in dollars or valuations in dollars, just convert that 1-to-1 to the Peruvian sol. So it makes it about 1/3 of what it is in the U.S., but it ends up being pretty similar. So yeah, 1/3, or 1/2 is a good heuristic for that.
Yeah, and so then the angel network that you work with sort of fills in that one step before. Is that how it works?
Yeah, I mean that's how we want it to work, and that's how I think it should make sense. One thing that having a investment fund offers to investors is the opportunity to diversify, invest in multiple startups, and for early stage investing, that's one of the best ways to have attractive risk return dynamic. What the angel network allows us to do is connect with local investors that can really add value or know local markets or the sector expertise. So that can be really complementary to the fund as well. And investors in the fund, I think, see a value to knowing that they're co-investing with local angel investors. So I think that's what we try to achieve with the angel networks that we have in each of the cities that we operate.
And more specifically, starting an angel network in Peru, what's the ecosystem like? Were there other angel networks before you started doing angel ventures, or were you the first one?
There were others that tried. Maybe the timing was too early and there were greater pioneers than we were, but those don't still exist. We started here over 2 years ago, and I guess of the 5 that exist now, we're the one that started the earliest. So it's taken a long time, but I think in the 6 years that I've been in Peru, it seems like the timing is pretty ripe for angel investors in Peru. I think a lot of the time we talk about investing in entrepreneurs, timing is a critical factor, and for us, building a network of angel investors, it seems like this is a good time for what we're doing in Peru as the ecosystem is building up.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I say it as somebody who took money from an angel network in Wisconsin on one of my previous companies, and then also watched the angel network in Chile, the Chile Global Angels, start to build from 2010 to 2017. So I've sort of seen these networks grow. So what's it been like on the ground of actually talking to successful Peruvian business people and investors to try to get them to invest in startups?
A lot of it is opening their eyes to how great the entrepreneurs are. I think it takes time for successful business people, successful investors, which most is the profile of angel investors, to catch up and realize some of the dynamic, disruptive things that are happening in Lima. I think most investors have or came in with the idea that the ecosystem was less developed than they thought, and they were kind of doing a service to the community by sitting down and mentoring college kids that were looking at creating business plans. And that dynamic has really changed. Endeavor came to Peru 4 years ago. They've done a great job of attracting and promoting successful entrepreneurs. The Peruvian government, through the Startup Peru program, which I believe was modeled in part after Startup Chile, has done a great job of giving entrepreneurs access to capital. So what it's meant is that there are really high quality entrepreneurs who are either serial entrepreneurs or successful professionals, successful operators leaving their jobs to start companies. So a lot of my work, rather than training angel investors, which I don't think they need much training, I don't think that they think they need much training, has been just creating a deal flow process to show them opportunities. And that's been as effective as anything we've done with them and in terms of getting capital to entrepreneurs, creating that process and showing them really great entrepreneurs. One of the things we've seen is that slowly but surely, these entrepreneurs are attracting VC capital from outside Peru. So that's certain validation in terms of the type of entrepreneurs that we have in Peru. And when local angel investors start seeing that, they realize that they're a little bit behind and that there's an opportunity for them to invest in entrepreneurs maybe before a VC round and increase their returns that way. So in summary, a lot of what we're working on is just introducing investors to great entrepreneurs and creating a community around that. So rather than investors seeing themselves as kind of people that are offering their capital and giving a service, they're really seeing themselves more and more as peers of the entrepreneurs that they're investing behind.
It's interesting. It's interesting to see that kind of startup ecosystem start to build. So you mentioned two pieces that are starting to help build it. One was Endeavor, and then the other was Startup Peru. Can you talk a little bit more about Startup Peru and what it's done and what it does?
Yeah, Startup Peru has to date benefited almost 300 companies with different amounts of capital, depending on the different stages of the business. So I think they give grants from about 50 soles to 500 soles. So maybe $25,000 to $150,000, depending on the stage of the business. So that was a really great initial support to the ecosystem and fulfilling an important role for entrepreneurs to take the risk and start a business with that initial capital. Another thing they've done, which I think has been interesting, is taking subsequent steps to support other actors in the ecosystem. Startup Peru also have competitions to support incubators and accelerators and angel networks. Angel Ventures in Peru, we're a beneficiary of the program as well. So I think they've done a great job, not just putting money out there, but also supporting different actors in the ecosystem and layers of entrepreneurs at different stages.
And is that a straight direct government program, or is it like Chile where there's a public-private entity in the middle?
I'm less familiar with Chile, but for the way I look at it is a straight program from the government to the entrepreneurs.
Interesting. Yeah, we had one of our portfolio companies, Denti, participated in Startup Peru, and they still have a team in Peru and have their service there. So it was interesting for them they got one of the smaller grants on the lower end of the scale, but it worked. I mean, they have a team, they have sales, and they probably wouldn't have gone to Peru next if not for the program.
Yeah, I think it's great to hear. And I think they've really done a good job of being open and learning best practices from other programs like Startup Chile and trying to build upon those. One I think the best things that they've done is in the different stages of evaluation, they bring in judges, not just local entrepreneurs or ecosystem actors, but sometimes the judges are Peruvian entrepreneurs living in the US, other successful investors overseas, to really make sure that the evaluation is as world-class as possible.
And what about Endeavor? So we've talked a little bit about Endeavor on other versions of the podcast. Can you talk a little bit about what Endeavor does in Peru and more generally as an organization?
Yeah, Endeavor supports high-impact entrepreneurs in all over the world, and primarily in emerging markets. And Latin America was a initial really important region for Endeavor. I think the best thing that Endeavor does is that they focus on the entrepreneur. They realize that the entrepreneur is the center of the ecosystem. And the second thing they do is connect those entrepreneurs with investors and mentors from all over the world. So a lot of the Endeavor entrepreneurs that I've had a chance to come across have really benefited from having, even if it's just 1 hour phone calls or even shorter panel sessions with some of the panelists and mentors in the Endeavor network. Beyond that, I'm really grateful to Endeavor as well. I kind of began meeting entrepreneurs as a mentor for Endeavor here, and that really accelerated my learning process and allowed me to be where I am. So I think it goes beyond just the entrepreneurs in terms of the ecosystem development. For many mentors it's a great experience to help us learn and get people in general excited about investing and supporting entrepreneurs in Peru.
So talking about investing and supporting entrepreneurs, what kind of companies do you look for to invest in Peru?
Our primary focus is innovative, scalable business models that can be become regional companies with very little capital. And usually we focus on stage after product market fit, and there's some type of validation with revenue. That seems like a sweet spot for us in Peru, especially because there are some good accelerators here that are producing companies that are already at that stage. And I think going back to what I mentioned about endeavor and entrepreneurs, it's not just the business model that is a factor in creating a regional company. It's also the entrepreneurs. I think a lot of the entrepreneurs that we like to see are entrepreneurs where either the team's complete or the entrepreneur is that type of person that already has the vision or know how to move to other countries and create a regional business.
Where do entrepreneurs that are successful in Peru, where is their next step? Where is like the next country that they generally like to go to? For example, in Mexico, almost always they're saying, I want to go to the US. In Colombia, they want to go to Mexico. In Chile, it's usually either Colombia or Peru. So what's that next step where Peruvian entrepreneurs are generally wanting to go?
The answer to that question is similar to Chile. Most Peruvian entrepreneurs talk about Chile and Colombia, and we normally encourage them to make the jump directly to Mexico. Not only because Angel Ventures is based in Mexico, we have an office there and know the market well, but also I think because of the size of the market and the opportunity and kind of the idea of go big or go home and make regional companies that can get to interesting size for Series A. It usually my feedback to entrepreneurs is to start looking at Mexico maybe earlier than they initially thought.
We think along similar lines, whether it's going to Mexico if they're a Latin American company that's going to operate in Latin America, or we try to push them direct to the States because, again, bigger markets, easier to sell, much more likely to get capital than if you jump from, say, Chile to Peru or Chile to Colombia. Although Colombia still is probably big enough that you can build your market and do some interesting things.
Yeah. And I think as investors in angel or seed rounds, the biggest thing we could do for our own returns and for the entrepreneurs is to help them get to the next round of capital, whether it's a regional VC or US capital. So the more we focus on making those connections and creating those relationships like you have in the US, the better we can increase the probability of success as investors and for the entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I think it's that. And then it's also unlocking the local entrepreneurs' almost imagination or understanding that they can actually execute in a country like Mexico or the US. Because a lot of, at least the entrepreneurs that I've met in Chile, a lot of them it's much more comfortable to just say, well, yeah, Peru's next door. I'm going to go expand to Peru next. Or Colombia, it's a similar culture. It's close enough. I may as well go there. And thinking that, well, Mexico's really competitive. The US is even more. I can't really do it when their product and their execution skills are actually plenty good enough. They just are kind of, maybe it's a lack of confidence from being willing to do it. I don't know if you see that in Peru as well.
Yeah, and I think you have a better perspective than I do from your work helping entrepreneurs get to the US. Yeah, I think it seems easy, and I was probably guilty of this initially to say, look at the neighboring markets, when really for a Peruvian entrepreneur entering Chilean market or the Mexican market, it's probably a pretty similar set of steps and functions and maybe even cost of traveling. So, I mean, why not go for a larger, more developed market and a more dynamic market as well? I think the more as Peru we open up as an ecosystem and realize the benefit of learning from others, I think, and entrepreneurs realize that the more other entrepreneurs there are, the more competition there is, the faster they'll be able to learn and grow, and just the more fun it is to be an entrepreneur.
So what kind of companies, or what more specifically companies in the Peruvian ecosystem have been successful, whether you've invested or just have seen them in the market? What are some of the success stories?
So some of the success stories are apps and e-commerce platforms that are really interesting acquisition targets for larger aggregators in Latin America. So I think it's maybe the natural ecosystem that you've seen in other countries in Latin America. The success stories in terms of exits that we've had so far is online portal to find homes, which was bought by Navint. And more recently, last year, Fandango in the U.S. purchased Cine Papaya, which is a online movie ticket platform that started in Peru. So those really transactional, scalable businesses that are that have models outside of Peru and pretty identifiable purchasers in the future are the ones where we've seen success so far. And more recently, in terms of the entrepreneurs that have had traction but haven't reached yet VC money or exits, more in logistics sector, e-commerce as well, and the beginnings of a FinTech ecosystem in Peru.
Interesting. Yeah. So FinTech, we've seen, and I think the numbers bear it out, is the number one vertical for receiving VC capital in Latin America. What's that sector look like in Peru right now?
Well, one of the things that we include in FinTech, which is the most advanced and attractive in Peru, is price comparison. There's a company called Seguro Simple, which is an online insurance broker for car insurance. So this is really attractive for consumers because they can save 25% on their car insurance. And payment systems like Kulki have also had success as well. In terms of lending, there are a couple good examples. I think Peru, because it's one of the most advanced, developed microfinance sectors and countries in the world, should have some type of advantage in FinTech lending and reaching underbanked populations. But it's still pretty early for FinTech lending companies to have enough traction and data to analyze companies' clients effectively. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that when we talk about our ecosystem and entrepreneurs, we're pretty all-inclusive in terms of what we consider Peruvian startups. There's a great team in Peru led by an American and Canadian in a company called EFL that has done scoring of underbanked globally. They just happen to live in Peru, and they're starting to use their algorithm to pivot towards lending with the data that they have. So there are some exciting cases like that have some type of regional presence already and just happen to be based in Peru. And companies like that, besides being success stories themselves, as entrepreneurs, there's other younger, newer entrepreneurs looking to start companies in lending. There's a great FinTech fund called Quona that was born out of Acción that's led by a Peruvian called Miguel Herrera, and he lives in Lima. So there are a lot of components that can make FinTech attractive in Peru. There is different sets of expertise that could make it an interesting place for some of these companies to come off the ground.
Awesome. What's it like to actually live in Lima?
Well, I love living in Lima. It's right along the coast. It's a big city of over 10 million people, and it's about a third of the population of the entire country. And it's really the only major city in Peru. But Peru is a really small, well, not really small, but it's a diverse country where from Lima, we're a 2-hour plane ride from the rainforest, the beach, the Sierra, where Cusco is. So because of the way Lima is geographically located in Peru, it's a great bounce off point for many other places in the country. I'm from the East Coast in the U.S., but I do compare Peru to California. It has the whole Pacific coast. There's a big culture of surfing here. The climate is really stable all year round. It never rains. So it's a fun place to live.
What are some of the other highlights of living in Peru?
Definitely the food. I mean, this is a major food center of the world. When we talk about the entrepreneurship ecosystem, we have a really clear parallel to what's happening with chefs here in Peru. The chefs in Peru are the most famous people in the country, and what they've created with the gastronomy sector is the type of ecosystem that we want to create generally for startup ecosystems. So I'm definitely spoiled in the food that I eat here.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the highlights for me of the times that I've been to Lima is just the level of food and the attention to detail and the interestingness of what's going on is really off the charts. I mean, I think I read that Peruvian food was one of the 3 most diverse cuisines in the world, along with Chinese and Indian food. It's just like a lot of people probably in the US don't realize how interesting and good it is.
Yeah, it's great. And one of the things that's funny is that in Peru, we don't have a lot of Mexican or Indian or Thai food. There's not a lot of other types of food, but the Peruvian cuisine is usually most restaurants describe themselves as some type of international fusion or fusion with other culinary details from other cultures and countries. So it's a really mix of all different cultures and traditions within the Peruvian cuisine.
And you've got good connectivity to the US from Lima as well, right? There's direct flights pretty much to a lot of places in the States.
Yeah, and we're the same time zone. Half the year we're the same time zone as the East Coast. It's a 6-hour flight from me to the East Coast in the US, even shorter to Miami. So, I mean, for me, talking with people on the East Coast and traveling to the East Coast, I think it's for me more convenient than if I lived in California. So most of the flights are overnight, so I can have a full day of work here, go to the airport, and have a full day of work the next day in the U.S., which is not the best way to travel, but once I've gotten used to it, it makes it pretty productive and seem easier than one would think to live in Lima and be connected with the U.S.
Yeah, I've gotten good at doing the sleeping on the overnight flights. Prefer flying at night now than during the day.
Yeah, exactly.
And so what about the Peruvian tech ecosystem? Is there any other tech going on outside of Lima, or is it pretty much all concentrated in Lima?
Mostly concentrated in Lima. There's a good university in Arequipa, which is the second largest city. So there's a developing ecosystem there. One of the factors that's essential that I mentioned before is Peruvian or Peruvian American tech entrepreneurs that are building companies in the U.S. that are hiring out teams in Lima or Arequipa and finding good developers in these cities as well. So that's a great support to us. And I think is going to, along with the universities here locally, the pull from the entrepreneurs, the tech entrepreneurs in the U.S. will be a big help, needed help as well.
So you talked about U.S. or Peruvian immigrants to the U.S. or Peruvian Americans that are now hiring teams in Peru. Are there any startups that maybe people in the U.S. would recognize, or is it still sort of under the radar?
A little bit under the radar. One of the companies that we've invested in is called Blazing DB, run by a UT Austin grad called Rigo Ramburu. He's gone through the Techstars Accelerator. So that's the type of entrepreneur that adds excitement to local tech entrepreneurs or developers here. And he's found the local team here. There's an entrepreneur called Raji Burham in Silicon Valley, create a company called Amigo Cloud. So it's case by case.
No, it's interesting. And we're seeing that across all of Latin America now, between Chile, Argentina, parts of Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, Costa Rica, Dominican Republic. There's lots and lots of engineers that are starting to work for U.S. companies that do business in the States. So it's an interesting development. It seems like U.S. startups were looking at, Eastern Europe and India for the last, say, 10 to 15 years. And now Latin America is kind of getting on the radar screen. So where do you see the startup ecosystem going in Peru over the next, say, 3 to 5 years?
Towards more venture capital, the next stage of investment. I don't know if there'll be local funds, but definitely funds that will dedicate more capital to Peru. From 2011 to 2015, there was no committed capital directed at Peru and Lima. So, it's a good dynamic for investors now that there's really good entrepreneurs and cases of entrepreneurs that can build regional companies. So there's not a lot of capital chasing those entrepreneurs. So I think there'll be more VC money to local Peruvian entrepreneurs that will give a big boost to the ecosystem. And another thing I think that needs to happen is more regional startups entering Peru. This is something we haven't really seen yet. Maybe Cabify regionally, Mercado Libre, and Uber globally, startups that have a local presence. But I think one dynamic that we need to see is to give better impulse to the ecosystem is startups in Mexico, in Argentina. Even if Lima is a tertiary market for them after going to the US, at least having a foot in Peru, local teams and country managers in Lima. I think this is an important part of attracting venture capital to Lima.
What advice would you give to either first US companies or regional companies that are starting to expand in Latin America about why they should come to Lima?
Well, I think definitely because of what I mentioned with lack of capital going after these opportunities, that there are really good entrepreneurs, talent to take advantage of for those investors and companies that are willing to make the jump or take the risk to invest in Lima. Also, Lima is a city with 10 million people, so we certainly have a lot of challenges and problems to solve. And I think it's a great place to test out hypotheses or find product market fit quickly with a lot of traditional inefficient sectors in a big city with a lot of people that can, help grow quickly. One thing we haven't seen, Nate, is startups in sectors where Peru has a competitive advantage. So I think that it's something that we want to see more and more and could be a great opportunity for Peru. Sectors like ag tech or mining tech would be great opportunities for entrepreneurs that can solve problems in those sectors. We have seen some in food tech. We put together in one basket food delivery, restaurant apps, software for restaurants in kind of this one bucket called food tech. I mean, many of us has the hypothesis that because of our food tradition in Peru, this would make sense that some startups will have a competitive advantage addressing needs in that sector here in Peru.
And what's something that someone in the US would find really surprising about Peru in general or just the startup ecosystem?
In terms of the startup ecosystem, I think besides being surprised at the level of entrepreneurs, I would hope that they'd be surprised by how well we're making an effort to work together as actors in the ecosystem. I mean, I think Peru, because we're a small economy compared to Mexico or Argentina, we know that as entrepreneurs and investors, the only way we can succeed is working together. So many things we do are collaborative with other investors or accelerators and entrepreneurs trying to work together to support entrepreneurs. So I hope they'd be pleasantly surprised with how well we're working together to catch up to other ecosystems in the region.
Yeah, I think that's a good point where a lot of people in the US don't sort of realize that there actually is stuff going on in Latin America where you might not even expect it. I mean, I had that same problem growing up in Wisconsin where you'd have coastal investors that wouldn't really think much was going on in even big cities like Chicago and much less Madison, Wisconsin. So it was, I think the same sort of mentality is happening or exists in the US still about not really understanding what's going on in a lot of these places in Latin America.
Yeah, we have to work together. I think I work for Angel Ventures, but I also identify myself as someone that works for the Peruvian ecosystem or works for the investment community in Latin America in general. If I don't think Angel Ventures Peru is the right investor at a specific moment for an entrepreneur, I really enjoy the opportunity to make introductions to other VCs in the region or in the US to be able to contribute and make that happen. So I really identify myself as a investor in not just in Lima, but in Latin America. And I mean, what you mentioned is Wisconsin is what we thought in Lima also 2 or 3 years ago, there's nothing going on. But when we started aggregating data, and we're at the point where last year there was $5 million invested in startups in Peru, and you aggregate data across Latin America, you start looking at the number of startups in Latin America, the amount of capital raised all across Latin America, and you look at it as one whole, it's usually the numbers are larger than people imagine. So it's an important part of what we do is aggregating the data and looking at ourselves as one whole regional ecosystem. It's easy for us to get into the mindset of country by country, but I think really what we need to look at is, city by city. And when we talk about entering countries, we're really talking about startups entering different cities. So I think the opportunity is much bigger when you start looking at either Pacific Alliance countries together, Mexico, Colombia, Peru and Chile, or the region as a whole.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, it's not really that interesting to build a company just for Chile or just for Peru. I mean, Colombia is a little more interesting, but even still, like, you really need to build something regional if you're going to be in Latin America, because, you know, the countries are just too small.
Yep.
And so going back to Angel Interest Peru, so I want to give you a chance to talk about what is the type of entrepreneur that you'd like to have contact you, and why, if someone does have a business other than money, why should they choose you to get an investment?
Well, I think there's a couple types of entrepreneurs that I think I've identified as really attractive. I like to think in frameworks rather than good or bad, but there is definitely a serial entrepreneur profile in Lima in Latin America. Maybe it's entrepreneurs that have done traditional business models and now working in startups, but there are professionals that have whole life started businesses. So that's a really attractive profile for us. And also operators. I think one of the dynamics that we want to see as we build ecosystems is that the opportunity cost for great leaders and operators is lower for leaving their jobs to start startups. So, I mean, we love meeting those type of entrepreneurs. We've met with Carlos Jordan, who runs a company called Ultra Casas in Bolivia. He worked at Bechtel in the US and Chile for 8 years. So he's a leader that knows how to execute. And Nicolas Droguet, who ran an insurance broker here in Peru. He started a company called Seguro Siempre, which is the online version of that. This is a guy that's an MBA from MIT Sloan. So those are the type of entrepreneurs where they explain to you the problem and their business model and unit economics, and you learn from them. It's not as much as dynamic as the investor figuring out what the problem and the solution is, more the entrepreneur coming from their own experience, sharing that. So those type of entrepreneurs, the serial entrepreneur, the operator, are profiles that we like to identify. And I think in terms of the business model, I think in two types. One is the high margin business that we maybe the Cine Papaya, the online ticket platform we talked about before. This is attractive because the exit opportunity is pretty identifiable. It might be a more quick exit for relatively quick for the investor. And then there's other types of businesses where it's a much longer term play, solving a much larger problem, like logistics or e-commerce or FinTech. These are companies that might take a longer time to reach success, but things that can be really disruptive and change industries. So, I mean, I think rather than give you a specific type of entrepreneur or level of sales, I mean, thinking in terms of those frameworks and entrepreneurs showing why they're the right person to lead this company or solve the problem is something that usually resonates.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what about going back the other way? What would you tell an entrepreneur of why they should think about working with you?
So for locally our Angel Network, the best thing we can do for entrepreneurs is try to create a process where they can quickly get to higher potential investors and not waste their times in meetings. We have a Angel Network in Lima of 55 people with different sector expertise. So, I mean, we need to use that network to benefit entrepreneurs and have that be of value to them. With Angel Ventures, we are trying to create a regional company, regional investment with regional reach. So I think that for companies looking at the Mexican market from Peru or Chile, we need to be in a really good position to help them enter Mexico because of the foundation and experience we have investing and working with entrepreneurs in Mexico. So I think those are the 2 points: value add, getting to local angel investors in Peru as efficiently as possible, and being a bridge to the Mexican market is something that we hope to provide to entrepreneurs looking for capital from us.
No, that's good. And so I wanted to see, so you've been in Peru now 6 years. If you knew everything that you know now, going back to give advice to yourself when you're first getting to Peru, what would you tell yourself?
I think I would tell myself to be really open to how my career would develop. I usually think pretty structured ways of job by job. You have one job leads to the next job, leads to the next job. And I guess I've been in Peru 6 years. I've had 4 different jobs. It seems like a lot. But as a foreigner living in Peru, I feel like it's the only way that I've really been able to learn is by having multiple jobs, working in multiple communities to be able to develop a base of coworkers and a network that I know I wouldn't have had if I just stayed in the same job. So I think what's helped me is thinking about my job in Peru as much greater than just the place I work, and more like establishing a career and finding my place. What's the best place for me in Peru, using my resources to help Peru? So once I start thinking about my job as much bigger than just the company I work for, it helps me to reach out, work in multiple communities, and find something that I think I have resources to do that maybe someone locally is not as in a good a position to do.
Yeah, so a more holistic view of the possibilities.
Yeah, definitely.
That's interesting. So what's next for Angel Interest Peru?
So the next step for us is to invest better as angel investors. With a group of 55 people, not all active investors, what we need to do is learn how to invest better together. Part of that is confidence, and another part of that is a vehicle, a structure where we can invest together, create a portfolio of startups. So we're working on creating ways we can invest small tickets together in startups, and for the entrepreneur together have a relevant ticket size so that we can increase the number of startups we invest in and not have one or two failures affect our long-term goal of investing in great entrepreneurs.
I think that's a very good goal for the next year or two. I really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation with me, especially on a Saturday. So thanks again for that. And it's been really great learning more about what you're up to and a little bit more about the Peruvian ecosystem. So thanks again.
Yeah, thank you, Nate. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and keep doing what you're doing. I think it's fun for all of us to hear these podcasts. So thank you very much.
Well, thanks. Appreciate it. And if you have anyone else that you think I should interview, just shoot me an email. So, and that's true for anyone else out that's listening. I'm always looking for interesting guests. So if you've got somebody that you think I should for sure interview, let me know. But thanks again for being on, and I hope that we can co-invest on something soon.
Sounds good. Looking forward to it.
All right. I'll talk to you later. Thanks again for listening to this episode of Crossing Borders with my guest, Greg Mitchell from Angel Ventures Peru. Please think about subscribing to the podcast on iTunes and Stitcher and checking out previous episodes on nathanlustig.com if you enjoyed this episode. Thanks again.